Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney and today we have the final video in our B6543 sew along. I had a little bit of a snafu with this part 3. Sorry, I've also been doing other filming and changing my clothes a lot. So yeah, if you watch the daily vlogs, you're already familiar that I accidentally thought I was filming and I wasn't. Like, I had it off because I was trying to do it on my phone. Anyway, long story short, I ended up having to make 2 dresses. So I've got them, oops, hold on, falling off fingers. I've got them both. I've made a solid one in this ochre linen and then my print one that you have seen so far. So I will say they were made exactly the same way. They both have pockets, everything. So what you're seeing today is exactly what I had filmed for the other dress. So they, there should be, other than the fabric is different, there should be no differences in there. Before I get started though, I just want to show you, so today for the finishing touches, one of the things is putting in a buttonhole for our straps to pass through, and I just wanted to show that to you a little bit more close up. I put it right on the back piece at the side seam, but on the back side, on the right side. So this is right side when worn, and there's my belt loop, my buttonhole, where my tie passes through to make it a full wrap. And then I have put a little clear snap right there, and you can see right there, just hand sewed that on, and I determined that placement by putting the dress on and tying it, and then just kind of deciding where I want it, you know, where it lies flat, number one, and where it kind of wants to lie. That way, when I'm moving around and stuff, I don't have to worry about accidentally, you know, something slipping and me exposing a boob. Or more cleavage than I wanted to. So I just wanted to show you those up close, these ties. I tell you, this is the downside to wrap dresses. The only downside, really. Just the stupid ties. Okay, so we're finishing the dress today. We are making the skirt, putting in the pockets. I did keep the pockets in this pattern because they get sewn into the waist seam, which makes for a beautiful pocket. So both these dresses have pockets, which is going to be really handy. And I debated whether or not to put them in. I'm very glad I did. And then we are going to attach the skirt and bodice together. And then we do all the hemming, which finishes off the neckline and the hem of the skirt all in one fell swoop. And then we do the finishing buttonhole. And then I talk about putting in the little snap, the little clear snap there at center front. And then we're done. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this sew along. As always, leave any comments or questions you have down below. I definitely played around with some different camera angles in the sew along, and I think it did get better as it went along. Yeah, so hopefully going forward we're gonna have some good stuff. Okay, next week for sew along, I think I'm gonna, ooh, there was a big crash upstairs. I think I'm not going to do, a lot of times between sew-alongs I put in like a little breather week of like a tutorial of some sort. And I'm still up in the air. I'm either going to do a petite adjustment tutorial, because quite a few people have asked for that just as its own separate video. I talked about it a lot in the daily vlogs, but that's hard to go back and find. So I thought about doing that possibly. And then for our next sew along, we're actually going to be sewing the Kimberly dress. I'll pop a picture here by AK Patterns. That's Athena. She is back, and I wanted to do a sew along where I showed you how to fully line a bodice that does not have a lining. And this dress has facings and a sleeve, but I'm actually going to make it sleeveless, and I'm going to show you how to finish that off with the lining instead of the facing. So yeah, so we're going to be doing that, and I'm also doing some hacks for her, pictures for her blog, and so I'm doing a scoop neck version of that as well as a V-neck version. So I'm going to kind of, with that sew along, I'm going to show you how to do both bodices. So it'll probably be like, you know, a fitting, muslin, this is how I do my adjustments video, and then how to sew a scoop neck bodice video, and then the next week will be how to sew the V-neck bodice video, and then it'll just be attaching the skirt video, because that would be the same for either bodice. So anyway, that's my plans going forward. Yeah, and then I'll probably do that other butter pattern after that. So it's just gonna be a lot of summer dresses, I guess, for the next few weeks. And then I think after that, I'll probably delve into the swimsuit and get that filmed as well. So that's kind of what we have sew-along wise. All right, right now we are, let's see, where are we at? I think on Tuesday, I have to think about when you're seeing this video. Tuesday, I think we are doing my April makes. So I realize this is late in the month. I filmed them much earlier, as I'm filming this one much earlier in the month. And then Friday will be my May plans, even though it's the middle of the month. I actually filmed that at the beginning of the month so that you can, so I could get started on things. So yeah, that's what we've got going forward for this week. So I will see you then, unless you're watching the daily vlogs, then I'll see you tomorrow. I hope you guys have a good one. Also wait till the end of this video and you'll see me actually in the dresses, the actual twirls of me in the dresses, both of them. All right, have a good Sunday and I will see you guys next time. Bye. Okay, now we are going to do the skirt bottom. You're gonna notice that I have different fabric here. That is because I had a very big filming snafu when I finished the floral dress, so that none of that got filmed, the bottom part. So we've made a second one. Steps are going to be the same. All right, so far I've got one back piece. We're going to work on the skirt today, get that sewn up, and then we're going to attach it to the bodice and then finish everything off. So here is my skirt piece. I've actually cut my back skirt piece out on the fold. It asked you to cut out 2, but I didn't see any reason why you should do that. So I just took that seam allowance off the center back and cut it out on the fold. So I have one back piece on the fold, and then I have my 2 front pieces, which, I mean, there they are. Okay, and then I've got my 4 pocket pieces here. Now I have gone ahead and on each of the 4 pocket pieces, I have serged all the way around the curved edge. The straight edge and the top edge are raw because those get finished off in another step. So I just want to serge all 4 pocket pieces or finish it off however you're finishing around the curved edge. So I've done that on my 4 pocket pieces. So the first step is going to be on your skirt front and your skirt back. You should have a notch up here and then 2 dots. And I've just cut notches in where these 2 dots go. This will be on both either side of the back pattern, the back piece, and also the side seam of each front piece. And what we're going to do is we are going to line up our, basically it's the pocket gets lined up to the very top of the skirt. And we are going to sew this at 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to sew all 4 pockets on one on each side seam of the front of each front piece, and then one on each side seam of the back piece. And I'm going to sew it at 3/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to serge without cutting any excess off all the way from the top down to the hem of the skirt. So I'm going to go do that real quick, and then I will be right back, and we will talk about understitching. Okay, so I've sewn my pockets on, and I sewed those right sides together at 3/8 of an inch, and I serged all the way. Actually, I started at the hem and serged up. I had issues with my skirt growing last time, so just to try and minimize that. And then I've understitched, and basically what that means is I have pressed my pocket away from the body of the skirt. I've done this on both skirt fronts and both sides of the back, both side seams of the back, and I've stitched a line about less than 1/8 of an inch away from the seam line, sewing the seam allowance to the pocket. So you can see that. Okay, now we want to make note, there is here's my notch that's right here. This is going to be an important notch here in just a second. So I'm actually going to mark it with a pen just so we can see it better. But this notch, okay, you're going to have 3 notches, a top notch, a middle notch that matched your pocket, and then a bottom one where the pocket pretty much attaches to the side seam. Okay. Sorry for my wrinkly linen. You're going to take, this is my back piece right here, and right sides together, we're going to lay our back and our fronts together. We'll find that notch here in a minute. It's around here somewhere. Sometimes you have to pull apart the serging to see it, but I'll find that. But for right now, that's going to come in important though when we actually sew up the side seam, but we're not sewing up the side seam yet. What we're going to do is put these right sides together, and both sides, and I'm going to start here at the top of the pocket. I hope I'm in frame, and go all the way around the curve of the pocket, and we're going to stop here at the side seam, and you can go just a little past. I like to sew and then sew right over this seam allowance, and make sure, well, it should be at the pocket, both sides. I understitched that wrong. Okay, so I'm gonna have to go rechange my understitching. This seam allowance should be going towards the pocket. I'm gonna go unpick that and fix that real quick. But we're just gonna start at the top here of the pocket. We don't need to sew across the top. Just start up here at the top, sew all the way around the curve, and then I like to go just past the seam allowance when we get back up here to the body and back stitch, because we are then going to go back and we're going to sew straight down to the first notch, back stitch a few times, then start about 5/8 of an inch from the bottom, back stitch a few times, and then sew all the way down. But I'll talk about that more in just a second. So for right now, I want you just to go and sew your pockets just around this whole long curve edge. So I'm going to go do that really quick, and then I will meet you back at the sewing machine this time. All right, now when we're finished, so you'll have your pockets on both sides sewn just around the curve edge here. So we are still open here at the top of the pocket, and then down here at the bottom, the side seam is still open. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna find that almighty notch, and I don't know why they are so difficult to relocate. Which might make a case for actually, oh, I found it. Right there. Okay, so the notch, it's about that far down, but check your pattern if you did not mark it as like me. Okay, so what we're doing is we are lining up our side seams up here at the top of the pocket. So this is the side seam of our skirt right here, and then it extends out into the pocket. We're gonna start here at the top of the skirt and sew down to that pin, and let me just transfer that mark to the right side. Okay, so this is the notch that's on the pattern right here. So we're going to start at the top, sewing at 5/8 of an inch from the raw edge of this side seam here. And we're going to sew down and backstitch a few times at this notch here. We want that, it's the opening of the pocket, we want that to be really secure. And then, oh, I need to unpick that a little. Then we're going to come down here, disregard the pinch here, I will fix that. And right above this seam line that we sewed when we sewed our pocket together, we're going to start here at 5/8 of an inch from the side seam there, and backstitch a few times there, and then sew all the way down to the hem of the skirt. And we're going to do that on both sides, and that's what I'm going to do here after I've unpicked this little area here, which I'm actually not going to worry about re-sewing that because I'm getting ready to sew just right back over that. Another little tip, if you are using, there's a lot of bias on this side seam, which can mean a lot of growing if you're not careful. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start at the hem of my skirts and then sew up, and just make sure that you're matching notches as you go. There's a double notch right there to match those up, just to make sure you're not getting a lot of growth in there. And we should be fine. So I'm going to start at the hem of both, and I'm going to sew both side seams that way. Okay, so I've done one, and you can see where I've backstitched quite a bit right here at the 5/8 of an inch, and then down here at the bottom of the pocket, and I did go back and sew where I unpicked, just so that that doesn't come open later when I pulled out that pinch. And then we're down 5/8 of an inch all the way down to the hem of the skirt. So now I'm gonna do that to the other side real quick, and then I'll talk about pressing. Okay, and I did notice some growing. Again, if you're using anything that's a little bit loosely woven or heavy drapey like a rayon, you may get some growth on the side seams, so just watch that. I did have a little bit, which is why I was starting at my hem and working my way up, because then that kind of eases and pushes everything back the way it's supposed to be. So definitely watch that. I had that issue on my first wrap dress that I did, and I had to go back and even up that hem a lot. So, okay. So now we have our side seams sewn and our pocket sewn. So you have two options here. This pocket gets sewn into the front part of the skirt. So here's the front of the skirt here on this side, and this gets pressed to the front, and then the top of the pocket gets basted into the waistband. So it gets anchored in the waistband, which makes actually for a really nice pocket. But you have two options. So the pocket piece all needs to be pressed to the front, because that is how the pocket lies. So you can either press the entire seam all the way down to the front, or you can clip in the seam allowance right below this pocket, so the back seam allowance, up to the stitching line, so that you can press the seam allowance open from the bottom of the pocket down. I do not like that. I find that that just is another area of weakness that's there, and in this linen, which tends to be just a little bit looser woven, I just don't want to add that kind of weakness there at the bottom of the pocket where there's going to be a lot of my hands going in and out, or, you know, a phone in there or whatever. So I'm just going to press all of my seam allowances to the front of the skirt on both sides. So I'm going to go do that real quick, and then I will be back. All right, so once my seams are all pressed to the front, I'm going to take, so my pocket piece should naturally flop over to the front side here, and I'm just going to baste along this top seam, the top of the pocket, at 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. Baste that in place, because that's going to get caught in the bodice seam next. So I'm just going to baste those in place on both sides. So those are all basted in place to the front of the skirt. So now I'm going to go get the bodice, and we're going to attach that real quick. Okay, once all of your notches are pinned, and you can pin all the way around if you want, I don't normally, you're gonna have your annoying ties. They're still annoying. Just kind of tuck those in and out of the way, but as you're sewing, you're gonna wanna make sure you're not catching those in anything, because they are super annoying. Just the nature of the wrap dress. Okay, and you can sew with either the bodice against the feed dogs or the skirt against the feed dogs. It's kind of whatever your preference. I'm gonna sew with the bodice to the feed dogs. So I'm just going to sew at 5/8 of an inch. Nothing real exciting here. Just making sure those ties, we aren't sewing the ties, anything to do with the ties. Those get secured into place with the bias here in the next step. So just tuck those out of the way. 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And just be careful. If it feels like you're sewing over multiple layers of fabric, you probably are. So if you're not in a place where that should be happening, you may want to check underneath your feed dog or underneath your presser foot. I know you can't see very well right now, and I apologize. It will get better here in just a second when you need to really see up close. Okay, now I like to go back and make sure nothing got pinched going the wrong way. And everything, my darts appear to be lined the way they're supposed to, my seam lines do, so I think we're all good. Okay, so now I'm just gonna go and serge this seam line and then press it up towards the bodice. And then we're gonna attach our bias tape, and I will put you right front and center of the machine to show you how I'm gonna do that. Okay, so now we're gonna finish off our neck edge. I am using bias binding from the other dress because I have enough left over, so there was no reason for me not to use it. So on one end of the bias binding, I have folded over a 1/2 inch. Sorry, that is really dark. Hold on one second, let me adjust my lights. Okay, I was trying to adjust my lights a little bit. I don't know if that helped much. Okay, so on my bias binding, I've just folded over one edge about a 1/2 inch, just somewhere around there. So what we're gonna do is, remember we put all of that twill tape around the edge of our neck binding. So I am sewing with the wrong side of the dress up. And I'm going to start at center back, and I have this mark. That's when I was, you know, quartering it off and marking where I needed to be. I also need to make sure my foot can get, okay, this is my sewing Olympics. Okay, so again, I'm using the bias tape left over from the dress because I can. All right, so I'm finding this little spot here. This is center back of my dress at the neckline. And I'm going to line these up, raw edges together, and this folded over edge is this way. It's not underneath, but it's this way on the outside. So that will get nice and covered up later. So what ideally I am going to be sewing at 3/8 of an inch. Technically this pattern is drafted for 5/8 of an inch around the neck, but I wanted to use 3/8 just because I wanted to shrink up the neckline just a hair. So I'm going to actually, so I'm sewing at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. Oops, sorry. But actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew, and it should be very close to 3/8 of an inch or a centimeter, but I'm going to sew really close right to the left hand side of this twill tape. So that's, while I'm in the neck portion or the bodice portion, I'm going to be sewing really close to that twill tape. And I'm going to be matching up the raw edges of my bias binding to the raw edges of the garment. And I've got my bias tape on the underneath. So let's not do that. Oh, for heaven's sake. Okay. So I'm just going to carefully go around. I'm going to speed you up while I do this, and I will talk to you when I get to the ties where the bodice and the skirt meet. Okay, I'm getting here to my waist seam, and this is, I'm trying to balance bias tape on my leg. I don't really want that to hang. Okay, so here's where my tie is, and it's doing something wonky at the moment. It's wanting to like hang out. So this you're gonna want to push towards the body of the dress so that it lies flat. So as you can see, my tie is going in straight like that. It should be basted in place. And I'm just going to go slowly, because we kind of have, I'm going to sew down and then we're going to kind of pivot when we get right to the seam line where the bodice and the skirt meet. Then I'm just going to bring that to meet that. And now I'm really going to focus on sewing at the 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch line all the way around the skirt until I get back to the other tie. So I will speed up this, and I'm also crossing my fingers I have enough bias tape. I'm pretty sure I do, but with the way my luck's been. Okay, let's go. Okay, I'm coming up to the other seam and the other waist tie. Just kind of tucking those out of the way. These waist ties get really annoying. So I just want to make sure that, again, that it's lying flat here. And I'm gonna sew up to this seam. And then I'm gonna pivot that. Okay, and now I'm back to sewing right, make sure you don't sew over that tie, right on the left side of the twill tape again. That's my main focus. Okay, when we get back to the beginning where we have our folded over edge, we're gonna line that up, our raw edges, and we're gonna sew over that line about just a couple of inches, just right on the previous stitching line. And then we're going to cut off the excess tape. Oh, and I have about a yard left. That's exciting. Okay, so now, so the reason we did that, so you've got a raw cut edge here, but when this all gets, so you've got the fold now right there. So when this all gets pressed and then pressed to the inside, that's finished off nice and neat. Okay, so our next thing we're going to do, and I'll do it off camera because that could be very boring, is I'm just going to trim the seam allowance we just sewed to about a little less than 1/4 of an inch. Almost half, maybe a little more than half, but I'm going to trim this all the way around because when we fold, this is going to get understitched like so. We don't want any of this seam allowance poking out past the fold. So we're just going to go and trim all the way around the dress at 1/4 of an inch, and then we'll be back. Okay, once you have trimmed your seam allowance, you kind of see it a little bit better. I've trimmed it halfway. So basically you just want to make sure that when you fold this back that the folded edge extends past your raw edge there. So now the next step is going to be, we're going to flip the whole thing over to the right side, which this is your right side right now, and we're going to pull the bias binding away from the bodice, and we're going to sew understitch. Basically, we're understitching. We're going to sew really close to the seam line there, and we're going to sew the seam allowance that's under there to the bias binding. So I'm just going to sew all the way around the dress, pulling the bias binding away from the dress and sewing that seam allowance to the bias binding. And when we get to the ties, when we get to the tie section here, you're going to pull the bias binding away and sew, but you're going to pull the, you're basically going to stitch with the tie towards the body of the dress and then the bias binding away, and you'll sew that way. Because when this all gets turned to the wrong side, then your tie will be the way you want it. So when you get to the tie, we're just pulling that bias binding away, and we're going to stitch with the tie towards the body and the bias binding away from the body. We're going to stitch right on top of there with the seam allowance towards the bias binding. Okay, I'm going to do that really quickly. Also notice I've not pressed anything. This is all just before I press. Okay, so that's what that looks like. We have it all nice. You can see the understitching there. Now the magic of understitching, you still don't need to press anything. we're just gonna fold it under, and it should want to fold under very beautifully. And now we're gonna top stitch our bias binding down. Now you can do this with the bias binding up, or you can do it with the bodice up. I actually just ran out of thread in my bobbin, and I don't have any more in this color, so I'm gonna be sewing with, the bobbin color is gonna match my bias tape, and my top stitching is the top stitching thread that I've been using, or the thread I've just been using. So it's really hard to rewind a bobbin when I've got the thread actually already on the sewing. So anyway, I'm going to sew with the dress up, and again, we're just gonna go all the way around the horn. And I'll put you in the other viewpoint so you can kind of watch me sew as we top stitch all around. We're almost finished. All right, so up close, this is the wrong side where we've got our bias tape is understitched. So now we're just going to fold it under and top stitch it down. So I'm going to start around the center back, if I can find it. You're basically doing all of this. You end up sewing the hem around like 3 times, basically. Sewing the bias binding on, then understitching, and then top stitching it down. Okay, so here is center back, you can see that. I'm literally just folding that under. And I'm gonna put this under here. And I am feeling underneath here. I want to make sure that I am grabbing the tape. There's nothing more infuriating because bias tape will change sizes on you just from pulling and stuff. So I'm just making sure that I'm actually, by feeling, that I'm catching the bias tape underneath. And I think we're okay. So it does get thicker in places, which is not ideal, but it's kind of the nature of the beast. Also trying not to pull too hard because I don't want this curved neck area. I don't want that bias binding to get pulled to the front at all. Okay, I'm coming up on the tie. Hold on. Let me get it into the view here. Okay, so here's my tie, and right now it's, you know, facing towards the dress because we were understitching. Now we're gonna flip it away from the dress so that when this gets tucked under, you'll be top stitching with that like that. And that. And here we are, we're getting to the curve of the skirt. So we're just gonna go slow. And the bias binding should mold, you know, into the curve as you go. So just, you know, inch by inch, making sure that the bias binding is favoring the inside, which it should because it was understitched. Okay, so there we go. We have a hem, there are ties, everything is sewn in place. I'm now gonna go over to the iron and, you know, because I've got some, you can see some like rippling kind of there. That's easily pressed out. With some steam, especially with this looser weave linen. So yeah, we've got bias finished hem. So now, yeah, I'm gonna go press that and then I'll come back to the camera and show you the last steps. Okay, so the very last step is to put in your buttonhole. And this is the back part of the bodice, this is the front part of the bodice, and I put it right behind that side seam and it's already been cut open. And I put fray check on there just to make sure everything's stable. But this is on, when it's worn, this is on the right side. So right there behind, on the back side, behind the side seam, on the right side. And then we have these ties to contend with that we did not finish the ends on. So there's a couple things you can do. You can definitely fold them under a couple of times, either top stitch them with the machine or hand stitch, whatever you want to do. Although I really like kind of the rustic look of literally just knotting them. I did that on my other one too, and I did that on another wrap dress I did recently, and I just really like that. So I literally just knot them like you would a drawstring. And then let the kind of the frayed edge kind of go. So that, and then there's another one somewhere, these annoying ties. So that is it. The only last step to do is to hand sew a little snap in there, which I showed you at the beginning of the video, if you so desire. If you're a little bustier and like that little extra coverage. Okay, so now I will put footage of me wearing both made dresses, the actual twirls now. So I hope you enjoyed this sew along, and I will see you next time. Thank you, everyone. Bye.